That is just a transition from something else into this story, but I don't want us to overlook that. So I'm going to ask us to do something this morning that we might not otherwise do with this passage. Because I think it's easy and it's fun and it's comfortable to look at this passage and imagine being on that hillside and Jesus healing people and he's talking and we're fellowshipping with other people and he takes out this food and multiplies that in a miraculous way and feeds us. And I love that story and it's been preached that way over and over and it should be. But I want us to put ourselves, instead of as in the crowd on the hillside, I want us to think about what's going on in Jesus' life. And that's where the stress comes in. He gives us some great examples about how to deal with stress and worry here and elsewhere. He gives us great examples throughout Scripture. And we're going to look at some of that here in this particular case. There are a few points that I want to make as we talk about this passage in regard to stress. And one is that sometimes you need to get away. Are you with me on that? Sometimes you need to get away. And Jesus was in that position as well. In this particular case, he's just got hit with some pretty heavy news. And I'll share with you a little bit that's in this passage and beyond. Because he's obviously going from one side of the Sea of Galilee, going over to the other to get away. But we learn that he's just found out that John the Baptist was killed. John the Baptist, you may recall, was actually a relative of Jesus. He was a cousin of Jesus. He was also a ministry partner. He was also a friend. So Jesus is dealing with some pretty deep grief. And I imagine most of us have been there. We've lost someone close to us. We can relate to that. Jesus can relate to that. He lost somebody he loved dearly. He just got hit with that. Not only that, John's death actually was not just dying, it was a beheading, it was murder. He was murdered. So Jesus is dealing with grief and sorrow. Maybe he's dealing with anger as well. Because this is a violent death, a murder. You might be dealing with some anger at the person who caused that. So sometimes you need to get away. Jesus is hit with that. He's hit with something else as well. We don't see it in this passage, but further back in the gospel and in some of the other gospels as well, we learn that at the same time, Jesus had sent his 12 disciples out into the countryside without him for the first time to spread the gospel and do some miraculous signs. So the ministry was real. This is a critical point of his ministry. He's the leader of this ministry. That's his game. He's got a lot of responsibility for that. Put yourself in that position. Think about work, what you've got going on at work. Now, he just sent the fellows out and to do these miraculous signs, spread the gospel, get kicked in the teeth once in a while. And they just returned, and that's when they brought him the news about John the Baptist. But they just returned because they were supposed to report back to him, and he was supposed to, as the leader, discuss about what they had experienced, answer their questions, teach them. He was bearing the responsibility of a workload as a leader of this ministry that, at a critical point, was just taking off. He had just sent them out on this big project. Do you get that sometimes? Sometimes you're at work, and you have lots of things going on at work. It's hectic. Maybe things are going wrong at work, and at the same time, you're hit with something in your personal life, things are falling apart, or you lose a loved one or something of that sort. So sometimes we need to get away. There's another thing Jesus is dealing with here as well that's noteworthy, that hopefully none of us have ever had to deal with and hopefully never will. His life is actually in danger as well. See, the beheading of John the Baptist was carried out by a Roman statesman, Herod the Tetrarch. And he killed, if you don't know that story, that's something to look back at. It's an interesting story. He was killed because of his ministry, essentially. And so now Jesus knows that John's been killed for this. Jesus is now in the sights of Herod the Tetrarch. And he knows that he's going to be looked at. His life is in danger, and it's too soon for him. He knows he's going to die. But it's a little too soon for him. His ministry's just taking off, so he's got that worry as well. Sometimes we need to get away. So, sometimes we need to get away, but then we think, yeah, it's a great thing. We're getting overwhelmed. When it rains, it pours. You know, you get all these things hitting you. You think you can handle a few at a time, but they don't come that way, do they? You get hit with a bunch of things all at once. You got to get away. You make plans to get away. And then what happens? Point number 2. Sometimes people won't leave you alone. You know what I mean? You need to get away, and you just can't seem to. And look at what's going on here with Jesus. He has the same instance occur with him. The same thing happened to him that we are so familiar with. But again, he's familiar with our woes. He knows this, and this is an example of how he knows. He's getting in his boat, and he says, I need some time alone. I need to pray, regroup, think about what we're going to be doing next. Some ministry things happening. I got a lot on my mind. Let's get in the boat and go across to the shore on the other side of the Sea of Galilee is where they are. We call it a sea, it's a large lake. So he's going across the sea and gets in his boat and arrives at the shore on the other side. And what's he come to? Over 5,000 people waiting for him. Sometimes you need to get away, and sometimes people won't leave you alone. And this just wasn't a crowd of a lot of people. I've never had 5,000 people wanting me for anything. I can hardly imagine what that must have been like. Not only did they show up in large numbers, they brought their sick people. They went to some burden to do that in some cases, I'm sure. They had certain expectations of Jesus. They had certain demands on Jesus. You ever feel that way? You need to get away and everybody's putting demands on you? That's what's going on here. He's got all these worries. He's got stress. And he's got some stresses that hopefully we're not going to have and won't have. But he can't seem to get away. I was wondering how I respond to that sort of thing. Have you ever thought about how you would respond? If you have, let's think about it now. Now we're talking about it. I can picture play. You ever put yourself in Jesus' place? If you haven't, do that once in a while. It's kind of fun. It's kind of scary, kind of humbling too. But I imagine me getting in my little boat, sailing across, and I'm just down, I'm stressed out, and I get over there and I see these 5,000 people with their selfish little thoughts, selfish little demands. They don't care what Jesus is thinking. They want his help. They want him. They want a piece of him. So what's Paul do if I'm going across the boat? I see those 5,000 people. I'm going to be a little tense. I'm going to be a little angry. Here's me telling you more about myself that you guys shouldn't know. It's tough for me it might be tough for me to take. It's like, for crying out loud, people, can you just give me 5 minutes to get alone with God? And it just is so difficult to happen. So, we need to get away. People won't leave us alone. But there's something else that I want us to think about as well. Sometimes being with other people, this is point 3, sometimes being with other people, especially Christians, sometimes being with other people is the best way to get away. I'll tell you why. This, by the way, is where the title of the sermon comes from. This is crowd therapy. You probably thought crowd therapy, you looked at the bulletin and saw crowd therapy. Did that mean, oh, the whole crowd's getting therapy? No, it's therapy being applied by the crowd to us. Let's face it, sometimes a distraction is really good, right? It'd be nice to have that distraction in Cancun, Mexico, or someplace like that, perhaps. But it's not always the case. We don't always get to go away to those places. But being in a crowd of folks can be a great distraction. And being in a crowd of like-minded people is the best such distraction. You ever think about that? When you watch the TV, watch the news at night, for example, you ever watch the news and you feel a little bit down? You look at what people are doing to each other. You think, well, that's lousy. And then if you keep the TV on and you watch the show after TV, you think, they're pumping trash into my living room. Those aren't my values on that show. Hey, some of it's funny, but those aren't my values. That's not what I want my kids to learn. And then you go to work, and frankly, you've got good folks at work, but they don't share some of your values either in so many cases. You start feeling disappointed in people, frustrated with people. You start thinking, maybe I'm the oddball out. There's nobody on earth like me. I'm just the odd man here. But you get together with a group of like-minded people, like on Sunday morning, Sunday school, church service, other opportunities where you get together as a crowd. And you realize the whole world isn't crazy. Much of it is, but not all of it. And you got people who do share your values, who are like-minded as you. Share some of your same interests. I've never raced diesels, but I can hardly wait to see Justin and talk about racing. That just sounds really cool to me. So we're going to share that like sooner or later, I can tell you. And I'm sure we'll all share some likes as well, but still our values, we have some common denominator in Jesus Christ. We can come here and get refueled. And Jesus got a little bit of that, I'm sure. There's another big benefit to getting together with a crowd. And Jesus took such great advantage of here. One opportunity in a crowd is the opportunity to help somebody else. There's research that's been done that when you help somebody, your body releases endorphins and makes you happier. Endorphins are things that get released in your body that are pain blockers and create happiness. And that actually occurs when you help somebody. Sometimes the best way to help yourself is to help somebody else. And if you haven't thought about that, give that some thought. I think you'll find that to be true. The best way to help yourself sometimes is to go help somebody else. So remember my example about how I would get across the shore and I'd be frustrated with all these people waiting on me to help them out. Let's, by contrast, look at Jesus' response to the crowd. In verse 14, the second half, it says, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them and healed their sick. Now, isn't that a much better response? The implication there is that there wasn't even a delay. He just jumped off the boat and started digging in. Let's look at his example then. Let's consider his example in how he handles stress. He gives us a great example, and he's had some stress that's beyond what I personally have dealt with. But he's given us a great example of how to go about it. Going ahead and taking advantage of the opportunity of gathering with that crowd, helping people in need, and praising God and blessing God in doing so. I want to shift gears just a little bit and look at one other thing at the way this gathering ends. Because Jesus leads them in communion at the end of this. Now, this is before the Last Supper and his resurrection and all that. The Last Supper, when communion as we know it was first established, and as we're going to celebrate here shortly. I understand this is well before that. But in a sense, he provides communion for them, serves communion. At the end of this day, Jesus fed these people, and it was probably the first time that most, or maybe all of them, had ever seen Jesus. It was probably the first time that many of them had ever fellowshiped with each other. There were 5,000 of them from various cities gathering together. And in another gospel, it tells us that he sat them down in groups of 50 and 100. So they're probably there with strangers. So the first time that they'd gotten together, and he's feeding them. And I thought about that relative to us. And isn't it a special blessing that today, on our first Sunday together, that we're going to share in communion? That's kind of cool to me. I looked up the word communion. I'm giving you guys a lot of definitions this morning. I don't know if I'll keep doing that or not. Maybe that'll be a part of my trademark. I'm just going to give definitions. And you're a school teacher, right?
I may, yes.
Okay, so hopefully you have some appreciation for that. If not, I'm sure you'll let me know. To commune means to communicate with someone or something in a very personal or spiritual way. Merriam-Webster Dictionary uses that word spiritual as well. I like that. So I just want you to know that I'm excited to be here. I'm glad to be here. I'm really looking forward to what God's going to do as he feeds us through his Holy Spirit and tends to us the way he did on that hillside with those 5,000 people all those years ago. Hopefully you're excited about it as well. All right. And I thank you for listening to all that. Amen. Okay, it looks like it's time for communion now, and I understand that Caleb is going to help me. Or what, was that for communion? Are you okay with helping with communion as well? All right, and here's what we'll do.
He does it all.
I guess I was just going to you because you're the man. I picked up on that. You're the bell ringer, you're the offertory man. Else you're going to be the communion man this Sunday as well, okay? Are you all familiar with the term intinction? It's a cute little word. You've done this before, I've heard. It's where you tear off the bread and you'll dip it into the juice and then eat the juice and then return to your seats. So that's the way we're going to do it. I am not a big fan of intinction. The church where I come from, we do it. I just don't think it's the best way to serve communion, and I understand that you don't typically do it that way, but if you'll allow me, I thought it would be the easiest way to do it today. And I've got the little rug up here to protect the carpet. So we'll do intinction this week, and then later on we'll do the cup. I like the cups better. I like the way you do it with the cups. I think that's a better way of doing it. So we'll do that in the subsequent months when we do communion Sunday. And let's see, anything else I need to say? So we'll have the bread and the cup up here. You and I will serve each other. So it'll be kind of a cool thing, okay? And then everybody can come forward and tear off some bread and dip it and then eat it and return to your seats. And I guess a crowd this size, we can just do it haphazardly, right? We don't have to say, let's start from the back or anything like that. I love this. This small church thing is awesome. And I've been in a lot of small churches as well as some large ones, so I'm really excited about that as well. And I'm going to, for the sake of hygiene, you can see me getting germ-free here, so. But I'm going to let you tear the bread yourself, but just in case I touch anything, I'll be not spreading any germs. So I think that's all we need. Are you ready? You want to join me here? I'm thinking that we'll make sure that we keep the rug underneath what I'll tell you what. Yeah, let's do it this way. Are you okay with the cup? Can you tell we've not done this before? We've not rehearsed? Let's go ahead and start though. Do you play something during this? Is that what you're doing? Do I talk first? Do I talk while you're playing, or how do you like it?
I play, you talk, you do whatever.
Oh, I've got theme music.
Yeah.
It's more fun than I thought. Awesome. All right, then let me get started then. On the night of his betrayal, Jesus took the bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, and he said, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And likewise, he took the cup, and he said, "This is the new covenant in my blood. Drink all of it, and as often as you do, do this in remembrance of me." You want the bread?